Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for today's multi-cloud live stream. Just a reminder, if you are joining us, that these are taking place every week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, featuring new speakers and topics. The recordings are also hosted on VMware Cloud YouTube channel, so you can watch them on demand. So we encourage you to check those out and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming up and what you may have missed in the past. Today, we are excited to have Vincent here with David and me today for our session on configuration management. Vincent, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. So my name is Vincent Riccia. I'm a technical marketing manager here at VMware in the automation group, basically under the umbrella of the cloud management business unit. So I focus on vRealize automation, and more specifically, I also focus on our config management integrations and solutions. So when we did the SaltStack acquisition, that kind of fell into my wheelhouse. So glad to be here today, and looking forward to showing you some cool stuff that we're doing with the product.
Yeah, and I think Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong. We're going to focus on highlight some of the security aspects as well as part of this because we've been doing security all month. Um, so we look forward to this with you, Vincent.
Great.
Yeah, exactly. As you mentioned, it's a security focused month. So I think we have just one more session to wrap up this month focused on security. And yeah, we'll let you into the demo. But before we get started, if just a final reminder, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat from wherever you're watching, and we'll be sure to address those during the call. With that, Vincent, we'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. Let me go ahead and start the presentation for you here. So what I'm going to do real quick is just go through a couple of things that I'm going to go through today in terms of what you're going to see actually in the demo. We won't go through all these services, but I like to just kind of preface, sort of where SaltStack Config kind of lives in the portfolio for us in terms of, how we are presenting this to our customers and how they can actually access it. Essentially, our vRealize automation customers have access to SaltStack Config. So essentially, it is one of the services that you will be able to take advantage of, just like other services inside of vRealize Automation. Today, we're going to look at Cloud Assembly a little bit. That helps you build out your IaaS layer, and then integrate in with SaltStack Config in a couple of different ways, and bring it into sort of a service layer inside of vRealize Automation. And then our service broker is our catalog service, and this is where you can present items to folks. So let's say you want to deploy a minion to your SaltStack environment. You can have a service broker catalog item that does that, deploys it, installs the minion on it, and then potentially run some orchestration on that particular minion, which is your machine under management from Salt, and do some stuff on it, like install applications or do some configurations on it that you might need to do. So we'll look at that a little bit. You'll actually see me interact with Service Broker in just a little bit of the demo. And then Codestream is our CI/CD pipelining tool. This can also integrate in with, some of the services that we offer with SaltStack Config, because basically you can interact with the API using CI/CD tasks, things like that. And I actually do that in my demos. Um, and also, we have a product that sort of is an add-on to SaltStack Config called SaltStack SecOps. And SecOps does run compliance and vulnerability scans. I think you're going to get into that more deep in a future session. But essentially, there's ways that you can use CodeStream to automatically run scans against machines that get deployed, and ensure that they're compliant and things like that. And then we have Orchestrator, right, our tried and true workflow engine, and then SaltStack Config now, which is our configuration management, native configuration management option now with vRealize Automation, but also provides much more, right? It provides the capability to do orchestration, remediation, and self-healing. So let's talk a little bit about that, because when we talk about SaltStack Config, it's more than just saying, hey, I want to install an application, or do some configuration on a firewall or an operating system. There's also capabilities for self-healing and doing more modern configuration management type activities that we will look at in the demo. So just kind of looking at this slide real quick, one thing that kind of differentiates Salt, I think, and makes it real powerful for our customers is the event bus, right? And so, if you notice kind of the title of the session here, right, the event driven driven sort of automation or configuration management. And essentially what that means is that, SaltStack uses an event bus when you have the agent on the minion. So you can go agent or agentless. But with the agents, there's activity that the minions can tee off of from the event, and then the master can say, okay, there's these events happening inside the system, and then you can write some logic and some stuff in order to react to those events in a way that you want the system to react to them, and that happens automatically, right? So we can use event-driven automation to detect and automate drift, and also potentially give you some security capabilities too, because you can deal with maybe services that are stopped that need to be up and running, like virus scan services or something like that, or if a system gets hacked like we'll see today, how do we remediate it automatically without user intervention, right? And so that event-driven self-healing event bus is really one of the more powerful kind of tools, actually, that or features of Salt that our customers can really take advantage of. That sort of differentiates it sometimes too. The other thing that the event bus gives us as well, just to kind of on that vein, really is speed and scalability. So not only does the event bus give me the ability to do remediation and take events or take actions based on certain events that may happen in the system, um, it also gives me the ability to scale out and do things very quickly, because that event bus is a high speed, zero MQ event bus that is where we are able to really talk to these minions very quickly. So when we look at this sort of architecture, it gives us a lot of capabilities that I think our customers are going to take a lot of advantage of. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's about all I was going to do on the presentation. Basically, what we're going to see in the demo is we're going to see a little bit of this configuration management, the self-healing, and then some of the powerful capabilities of that remediation. Okay. So great. So now we're in the product. Okay. So I'm going to start out just a little bit showing you just a little bit of SaltStack Config itself. Now, when we talk about SaltStack Config, essentially, it's a user interface on top of a Salt open architecture. Now, the SaltStack config system itself can be your Salt master. It can be where you deploy your minions, but it can also sit on top of a number of Salt masters in your environment. So you can have a fleet of systems out there being managed by SaltStack config and have a nice UI with role-based access and centralized job management in order to really manage your entire environment, right? So you come in, you get a nice dashboard, things like that, and we can see our minions. And here in just a minute, we're going to deploy a minion, and you'll see the minions show up over here, and then we'll be able to interact with it and get some information about it. But essentially, what I'm going to do is when I deploy the minion, I'm going to have the system automatically install some software on it for me based upon that reactor beacon system we saw inside of the presentation that I just showed. So let's go ahead and get to that point, and then we'll jump back into SaltStack Config. So let me log in here to vRealize Automation, and then I'll just request a service, request a virtual machine, and this will be our website. And so I'll just jump back into here. And then I'm basically going to go to our service broker service. And inside the service broker service, oops, sorry, went to the wrong one there. Looks like it decided to take me somewhere else. There we go. And so inside the service broker service, we'll see some catalog items in here. Now, the catalog item that I'm interested in right now is going to be our MOAD configuration request. Now, notice that this is a Codestream pipeline. So the reason why I'm doing a Codestream pipeline is because I want to be able to deploy this and then go hack it later. I want to be able to SSH into it and hack it. So Codestream has this really cool capability where I can deploy something and then I can SSH into it later based upon the IP address that it gets. So I'm just going to call this, my MOAD corp site deployment. And then I'll just call this the MOAD. And MOAD is mother of all demos. I'm just going to call it this. And essentially, we call it mother of all demos because we use multiple products as part of an entire solution, right? The other thing that this does is give me the ability to choose the environment I want to deploy this minion into in terms of the infrastructure. So right here, we also have some compliance that we may need to do. So let's say someone chooses, a PCI compliant environment, or they choose a production environment. The system will only put it onto clusters or hosts or clouds that conform to those specs. So basically, you're just using tags to make sure it lands in the right place, right? So even pre-deployment, we're able to kind of make sure that things are going to go into the right place for us from a compliance standpoint. Okay, so while that's deploying, let's go back into SaltStack Config and take a look at our minions. Okay, and basically we'll look at our minions. I'm just going to look at a couple that we've already deployed, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the one that we just kicked off. But because what I want to show you is that when you deploy a minion into the environment, there's some information that comes across about the minion. Now, this is another website I deployed earlier, or I don't know when I did. That was probably sometime in the last few days. And we get these things called grains, right? So salt, and then we get grains, right? And so you kind of see this terminology, but essentially grains are basically metadata and key value pairs about this system. So we see like the operating system family, we see the number of CPUs, we see the OS release, we see things like, how many CPUs it has, all kinds of information. You can create your own too. You can create your own custom grains. Now, what's nice about this is when you run jobs or you need a filter by certain grains. So let's say you want to create a configuration that says, hey, I only want to run this particular kind of configuration against machines that are Debian or Red Hat or something like that, or Windows. Then you can say, okay, only run this if the minion is a Windows machine. And that way the system goes, it sees, oh, here's a Windows machine, I need to run this on it, and it won't run it on the other machines that don't have that grain. So it's a great way to kind of, sort of filter out things in your environment. Now, real quick, what we're going to do, oh, was there a question?
Yeah, actually, I just had a quick question. So, one of the ways that you can filter and customize, are you able to do that by, if you're using tags, for example, if you have specific tags?
Yeah, so think of grains like a tag, actually.
Okay.
And so you can actually use grains like a tag itself. Now, in vRealize Automation, you can generally use tags, right? You can apply a tag to a machine. And at the time of deployment from vRealize Automation, we do have also methodologies by which you can create the grain at deployment time. So if you want a grain to come across with it and then filter based on that, then there's capabilities to do those sort of things. But yeah, think of your grains inside of SaltStack Config like your tags in essence. Yeah.
Hey,
Hopefully.
Vincent,
Yep.
I had a couple questions too around sort of the architecture here.
Sure.
Are the minions sort of one-to-one to the configurable item? Basically, is like sort of they effectively a proxy for that item. Is that the way to think about them, or is it different?
Yeah, well, think about the minion, and hopefully I understood your question. So think about the minion as the system under management from Salt. So
Right.
your minion will be like your website, your
Right.
database
That's
servers.
what I was
Yeah,
getting. So it's like
yeah,
it's one-to-one with whatever the configurable item is, basically, right? It's
yeah,
not
right.
a minion doesn't control like many items. It's like it's just a proxy for it. It's the vehicle that allows you to communicate the kind of config
Yeah.
information you have.
The
Okay.
the minions here all have an agent on them.
Right.
So all these minions right here have an agent, and essentially that agent talks back to a Salt master, and then we can then manage them. But these guys have databases on them, these
Right.
guys have websites, all that stuff. Yeah. So think of a minion like a system you're managing. Yeah. And then essentially what you're going to do is you're going to run jobs against those systems, and those jobs will have certain configurations you're going to run against them, maybe downloading packages, right? Like if you want to install MySQL or Apache, right, you'd have what they call these state files, and these state files have the logic in it to do things that you want to do on that minion. And then you create jobs basically, or I mean there's different ways to apply the state file, but you can create it inside of SaltStack Config. What's nice is you can create a job and then apply that to a bunch of systems at once. because I can go into my all minions section and say, hey, I want to run that particular job or that particular state file that has that logic, maybe against all my web servers, right? Well, I don't have any in there. Let's look at my web servers. Yeah, so I want to run it against all these systems, right? And so basically, when I do that, it gives me the ability to target them and things like that. And so that's also one of the nice things about it, if that makes sense. Did that answer your question, you think?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
That's what I
All right,
was
cool.
looking for.
Now,
Thanks.
oh yeah. Mhm. And so what we're doing basically, with this particular setup, and let me just go through here. Okay, is basically what we're doing is we're looking at our reactors, right? And essentially what we're saying is, that when the reactor kicks on, you have a system that gets up and running. Essentially what we're doing is, we're going to look for events that occur in the system. So when you have, like, let's say, an authentication event, what I'm going to do is say, anytime a minion tries to spin up, I'm going to accept the key of that system. Okay, I'm going to accept the key from that particular minion, and then go ahead and auto accept it. And what happens is the reactor goes, oh, you have a salt auth event. Okay, let me go ahead and accept that key. We go in to accept the key, and then we can filter down further by the minion name and things like that. The other thing that we can do essentially as well is do something like, like deploy the application. So when the reactor comes online, or when a minion starts up, we can look at certain events like, hey, salt minion start event occurs, and then what we can do is we can say, okay, let's run this OpenCart SLS file to actually get our application installed. Right. So anytime a minion starts up, it's going to run this OpenCart SLS and say, okay, any system that starts with that mini OC like we just did, essentially going to run this this OpenCart application for us. And in this OpenCart application, essentially what we have is the ability to run these like it'll start kicking off all these installations for us and things like that. Okay, so it'll go and install our packages, it'll install scripts. The other thing that's nice about the SaltStack config interface is that we can put scripts into certain sections of this tree structure. So I can go into files and then go in here to, like, let's say setup.sh. Maybe that's the script I need to run that actually installs the application. So we can say, hey, here's the script I need to run, and that can be stored right here in this particular tree structure. So I've got my setup.sh that has all the script I need to run my app, and then so forth. Okay, so that just gives us a really nice capability there to store scripts inside the system, and do things like that we need to do. Okay. And then also the other thing we do on these systems is we lay down a beacon on them. And essentially what the beacon does is the beacon is a small file that can go onto a menu. Now you don't need the beacon there, but you can put the beacon there if you want to watch certain events or certain things that happen on the menu and then react to it. Like, for instance, the beacon can look for a machine that maybe maybe a service is stopped, or your disk usage is high, or a file gets modified or something like that. And in that process, you want to do something about it. Okay, and so then what'll happen is your reactor will pick up on that event, and then it can do something like react to it, like down here, right? So for instance, in here I say, well, if my beacon notifies that this particular file gets modified, or that beacon reports that event, then go ahead and do this, fix index php.sls and so forth, and that way we can kick off more orchestration automatically based on the beacon. So the reactor beacon system is really good for doing things like, one, the reactor can go ahead and install the app, and then two, the beacon can then continue to watch the system and have the reactor do something if there's changes or something on there. And that's how you can really, like, take advantage of, like, more of a security type thing as well, because you might say, hey, look, if someone changes a firewall port or someone does something on the system we don't want them to do, we can react to it right away without having to run like a scan or something like that. Does
So
that make
are
sense?
there any, so the beacon is only used in places that you designate it to, is that correct? And then if yes, are there any, certain instances or examples that you recommend to best use the reactor?
Yeah, so you really want to use the reactor in situations where you want the system to do. Traditionally, a good use case might be like a system starts up, and you want SaltStack to automatically do something with that system. Okay, and you don't want to have to interact with it yourself, right? Or there's a number of events that occur in the system that you might want to react to automatically. And the other thing that you can do as well is you can send custom events. So let's say that, maybe you want to do something based upon some custom event that's maybe not in the system, where you can send a custom event. There's a way to do that. So if you look here, I've got a capability to say, okay, if this custom event comes across, then go ahead and run this state file here. And this gives you the ability to do that. So usually starting up and then maybe doing something that was with that machine automatically, or you might say, hey, look, if we notice this particular thing occurs on a minion, we want to send a custom event right away, and then we have some custom scripts that we need to run on that machine. And the beacon really is more for looking at changes on the minion over time. So you can look at, like let's say the system, like I said, like gets high disk usage, or someone makes a change to it, or service stops, or something like that, and you want to automatically start that service back. Or someone starts a service or does something on it that you don't want, you can change it back to where you need it to be. So that's kind of the way to do that, right? And so I think that that hopefully that answers your question, but those are a couple of examples there.
Yeah, it sounds like the beacon's as a form of a listener, right? It's sort
The
of
beacon is
listening for
basically a listener, correct?
listening for events, and then notifying the reactor. Then that's where you would have sort of stored jobs that are tied to specific types of events, right? So then they
Right.
kicks them off.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's essentially what it's doing. Yeah. Okay. So one other thing I wanted to kind of preface here, and sorry, I just realized that I typed in something wrong a minute ago. So let me just kind of do this again here.
We're distracting you with all the questions.
Oh no, you're good. These are great questions. And no, I'm glad you're asking for sure. This was mostly just me kind of being maybe not having no coffee yet.
I'm going off and on mute because my dog started to bark.
Yeah, I know that. I'm surprised that hasn't started happening over here too. Okay, yeah. So another thing that I want to kind of show you. So basically, what happens, like when the machine comes up, right, and and is actually deployed, right? What we're doing is we're running orchestration on those machines, and essentially, when we do that, we're essentially running orchestration on them. And so you can see kind of what happens on those systems here. So you get like some good data coming back as well. So we can see a state file ran right against our machines, and essentially those will come back and show us, hey, here's some information about the applications were installed and things like that. So we also get kind of that data back as well from our state files being ran on here. So you can come back and see one probably hasn't returned yet. So and all kinds of information as well, so we can see that the minions running and the beacons were deployed and all kinds of stuff. So there's also that good feedback that we get as well, from the system. So, and so I was just waiting for, yeah, here we go. I think this will work here in just a second. So we should see the minion popping up. Sorry, it was kind of something I did incorrectly there. So the other thing that I wanted to show was the other thing too that we do, and sometimes I do this in my demos. How am I doing on time? I realize I'm probably going a little long here, but
Yeah, we got a little bit more time.
a little more time. Okay, good. So another thing too, and you're going to see this a little bit more, I think when in another session coming up. But one thing I also like to bring up is that when we deploy these MOAD web servers here, essentially they go into a bucket, and they go into this target group. And essentially, when they go into this target group, they go into MOAD web servers, and then we have with SecOps, which is an add-on product to our SaltStack Config portfolio. They automatically get put into this group right here, and we have policies associated with that group. So I've got a policy here with that group that says, ensure ICMP redirects are not accepted. And so what that does is it automatically checks these web servers for me to make sure that they are in compliance with that. So this can be an ongoing process. You can schedule jobs, do different things, even from VRA to kick this off. Or just manually run these or schedule these to run periodically. And this will go in and check to make sure that, let's say, certain compliance is met on your web servers. You can create custom compliant packs and upload them in here, or you can, just go with the out-of-the-box ones that we update with the system periodically. Okay, and so essentially what you can see is that your minions will show up in here, and then you can run your assessments against those systems. Okay. And let's see if this one came over for me real quick. That should be 156. Yeah, there it is. Okay. So the minion did show up. Sorry, I had to kind of redeploy it there. So the minion OC Moab site came up. So this was the one we deployed a little bit ago. Let me see if I've got it over here now. Yeah. So when we look inside of our deployments, we can see that I've got a 156 IP address here, and our Salt minion was deployed. Okay. And so basically now I should see that minion here, this minion OC Moab site, and there's my 156 address. So if I click on it, right, it's I can see the grains of the machine and things like that in the IP address. And if we go over to activity, might be done already. Yeah, it's done already, pretty much getting done. We can see that this orchestration is starting to run, and basically what it's doing is it's running this particular file right here based upon the reactor. So the reactor says, oh, I see a machine coming in with that name minion OC. Basically, my filtering criteria is the prefix of the name, which is a minion dash open cart. And then it's going to start kicking off this OpenCart SLS for me here. Okay, and then install all my packages. And that's what that job was that just ran. Okay, so let's go in here and just see if the site's already up and running for me. It may be still kind of getting deployed, but let's just see how it's going. Okay, it did come up. So essentially, the Moab, our Superstore, website came up for me, and Salt was able to deploy that for me as part of the orchestration. And so essentially, let me come in here. There we go. So the other thing that we can do with this, when we deploy these minions, we lay it, like I mentioned, we lay the beacon down. Now in this particular case, what we're doing is we're putting the beacon. Let me go back to my file server here so I can show you. We're actually putting that beacon, installing that beacon down onto the minion. So if you go to my OpenCart SLS, I have a state in here that says deploy the beacon file. And that beacon file is actually located, like I showed you earlier, right here. So I don't need to store it somewhere if I don't want to. I can put it right here and then call it using the source here. So the source says, hey, look in the OpenCart directory under files and then beacons.conf, and then put it down there. Now, when we put the beacon on it, what's going to happen is it should, and I'm going to basically use Codestream to hack into the machine, overwrite that index.php file that this is pointing to, and then it should try to bring it back. When it brings it back, essentially, it's going to replace it with a known good one, which is over here in my fix hack directory. So it's going to replace it with this known good one right here after the beacon gets triggered. Now, I had to put a sleep timer in here. So this is essentially what happens when the reactor notices that, or the beacon tells the reactor, hey, someone's modified that file. The reactor goes, okay, well, you've already told me what to do about it. I need to go to this fix hack directory. I need to put this new index.php down onto the minion. And essentially what I had to do is I had to put a sleep timer in there too, because the change back to the original site would happen so fast that you wouldn't really see the hack. You wouldn't see our cool graphic that we have on the hack. So so that's kind of the idea of the beacon, right? And then so I'll go ahead and see if hackery will work here, and then where it's going to deploy the right index file back, and then this is essentially what happens during the hack. So let's just go ahead and here. So yeah, we just hacked you. So so from Codestream, I ran the hack SSH into the machine that got deployed. So we just hacked you, and so yeah, and
not a laughing matter, but
yeah. Well, and one of my jobs here in the group that my manager gave me was I'm responsible for picking these images, and I'm supposed to like pick ones that are also seasonally relevant. So if I do this during Christmas time or Thanksgiving coming up, the image might be a little different. So
That's fun.
We did one last year. It was Halloween time.
Might be Santa with his pants down or something.
Right. We did one with a Halloween with a pumpkin there. And so yeah. So now it gets it back to the original site. Yeah. So you can see all the big tasks that I get around here, right? Yeah. So then the beacon brings
so that's
it back.
cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was listening and saw that something had changed. It went and redeployed the right files.
Yeah, we could see it happening here too.
Yeah.
So if you're ever wondering, hey, did my beacon actually work? You can go into the activity inside the jobs, and then we can see, okay, here's that site, and then we can just check and make sure, that the beacon did run here. So you can see the sleep timer there, and then that the open card is in the correct state. Because what the state files do, so when I go to my file server and I look at my states, they are actually enforcing a state. So they are enforcing something on the system.
Yeah, it's a desired state.
A desired state.
And that makes sense. And what's beautiful about this, and this is sort of like best practice now, is that you don't manually go and reconfigure things. You sort of go back to the desired state, right? So you always know the good state. You sort of blow away what's wrong and just do the whole pipeline again to make sure that it's exactly as you expected it to be, basically.
Yeah. And one thing you can do too, like you can, schedule jobs that enforce a state. So reactors beacons is one way to kind of, make sure things are kind of happening the way you want to automatically. But you could also create more maybe sophisticated states for systems, and you could schedule jobs to run periodically. Actually, you can schedule them to run every minute, and they could go enforce the state, enforce the state, enforce the state. There's also something inside of SaltStack called a top file. And not to get too in the weeds, but they kind of call it a high state. And a top file is a great kind of methodology to enforce certain states across a big, like a big fleet of minions. So if you have a ton of minions out there scattered all over the place, you can do some really sophisticated filtering, and then enforce some states across. So SaltStack really has some cool methods and some interesting methods by which you can enforce state in a system, and that could be you could be security minded in that too, right? It doesn't always have to be an application state. It could be a compliance state or something else. So there's SecOps, right, which can do your scans or remediations, but then there's also just the ability to enforce certain things as well in the environment. So just to give it that security twist, I guess.
Makes sense.
That up,
Oh, it's cool. It's all good. That was really great. That was a good walkthrough, good overview.
Good. Any questions or anything, or?
No, I had a comment because the mother of all demos that like we talked, because we've used MOAD stuff on a number of these. So and I was commenting because I've been around long enough to sort of know its origin, which was about 5-6 years ago. It was part of a VMworld general sessions piece of work, and they were building, and that's where the mother of all demos concept came out of, and then they continued it.
Yeah. And then what we did was we took that and we evolved it into like a little fake internal company called MOAD.io. And last year I did a lot of MOAD stuff last year, especially we were doing a lot of that for our hybrid cloud. And so yeah, we just continued to use it. Just it just works, and it's a fun little company to kind of mess around with. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you so much, for the overview. And as you alluded throughout the session, that we'll have more to feature from this solution and what we're doing with vRealize and SaltStack next week. So that will wrap up our theme on security this month. So thank you for joining us and being a part of it.
Great. Thanks for having me. It was wonderful.
And if you're looking for just a little bit more information on these solutions, feel free to check the resources out in the description on YouTube. And you can learn a little bit more about the solutions, do your own exploring. And as we mentioned again at the beginning, please feel free to subscribe to our channel. And you can see these new sessions coming out every Tuesday and Thursday and see what we've done in the past. So hope you do that. And we'll hope to see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.